What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another collection of spooky true stories. Today we're going to be reading stories about people who have had close call abductions. My friend and I, who was also a female, were hiking in the state park behind my house. We were about 15 or so. We came up to a little creek, and on the other side was a group of people doing yoga. A guy beckoned us over to him, and at first we thought that he was trying to get us to join his yoga group, so he didn't cross right away, but that's when he got increasingly insistent. We started to shrug him off, and we kept on our side of the creek. That's when he quickly walked over to another woman in his group, and he whispered something in her ear. She snapped up and then started yelling to us. She started saying things like, "Hey, I know your mum, come over here." That's when we were kind of sketched out, but it was a group and there was like 15 people there. So we figured we were safe because they can't all be bad people. So we crossed the creek. The lady came over to us and told us not to look, but that there was a man hiding in the bushes not far behind us. And apparently he was. She and the original guy walked us back to the main path and found a ranger. It still creeps me out when I think about it. Okay, you guys, I actually have my own personal story time on an experience that is pretty much the same as this, except I confronted the person. I might make that like a completely other video, but that stuff there, literally, like, it's so creepy. This next one is... About 4 years ago, I'd moved into my husband's apartment after we had started dating seriously. He worked a big boy job. It was a 9 to 5, and I was a cook at a restaurant, so I worked and slept odd hours. One afternoon, I was asleep in the back bedroom when I woke up and saw what I assumed to be my significant other standing at the foot of my bed. My husband is a giant, and it was the same size as a person in my room. We had blackout curtains, so I can sleep during the day, and it was nearly pitch black in the room. I grabbed my phone to check the time because he definitely wasn't supposed to be home at that time of day. So when I saw it was about 12 p.m., I asked the person at the foot of my bed if he was okay, because I still thought it was my husband. The figure turned and walked out of the bedroom, and I heard a door slam. So I fell back asleep. After a few hours, I woke back up, and I got out of the bedroom to walk to the living room, when a shard of glass sliced my foot open. And upon hobbling to the kitchen, I discovered that somebody had smashed the glass of our sliding door and tracked glass and mud all throughout our apartment. Thankfully, we had just moved our electronics to the bedroom that I was sleeping in, so nothing was stolen. We called the cops, and they did their usual CSI stuff and told us that they couldn't catch the guy because he's probably long gone and we should definitely invest in a security system or just get a dog. The police said that the man had broken in and stood by my bed for so long that his boots had left dents in the rug, not only at the foot of my bed, but at the side of my bed where I was sleeping. I chose to believe that somebody was probably trying to rob us of all of our electronics, but my husband thinks that the guy was there specifically for me. We've since moved house and we got an alarm system. We also got 2 adorable pit bulls that probably wouldn't do shit to stop an intruder, but we also bought several guns. Yay, America. When I was in 6th grade, I was a latchkey kid who walked home from school. One day, I forgot my house key and I found myself locked outside, very bored. I sat on the curb across the street, dragging a stick across a metal sewer grate because it made a fun, melodic, clanging noise. I slowly became aware that there was a silver hatchback idling on the side of the road down the street with 2 people in it. Then I noticed they were looking at me, staring right at me. I started to get freaked out and I got up and walked toward my house, which was a townhouse at the top of an inclined driveway that we shared with our neighbors. Between the front door and the driveway was a well-fenced-in area, and that's where we kept the trash cans. The silver hatchback followed me up the driveway, and I'm not sure exactly what my plan was, but I ran up to the alcove where the front door was and I pressed myself against the wall. I was obscured from the driveway by the trash can fence. That's when I heard the car reach the top of the driveway, and I heard the doors open. A man's voice said, "Damn, the kid got away." He got back into the car and left. When my parents got home, I couldn't wait to tell them, but I don't think they believed me. My dad said that if they were really trying to get me, they would have followed me to the door instead of giving up on the driveway. And that makes some sense. I don't know if they were there trying to mess with me or what, but it definitely happened and scared the hell out of me at 11 years old. One of the commenters that replied to this story said that the parents were probably just trying to not freak out the kid. And I think that's probably true. Okay, this next one is actually like terrifying. When I was 15, I was visiting some friends in a nearby town. It was just us 4 high school bros hanging out. And what do you do when the parents go to sleep? And that was my first time ever doing it, which only made the following even more terrifying. Also note that this was before the days of cell phone ownership. None of us owned one at the time. So again, what do you do when you're 15 and you go to the park and set off fireworks? We were having a blast for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we ran out of fireworks and we figured the cops were probably on the way. And that's when we started to head back. But wait, we're starving. There was only one solution. We go to Taco Bell. It was only a couple of blocks away, so we get our Crunchwrap Supremes on and they were delicious. We were walking back to the house, all full and happy, and still pretty. It's the middle of the night in Oregon winter, so it's chilly, it's raining slightly, and it's kind of foggy. A car drives up from behind us and pulls over right next to us. It rolls down the passenger window. The driver, a middle-aged guy, says, "Get in." We laughed it off and we keep walking, and he drove off. At the next block, the same car pulls into a driveway just ahead of us so that he's blocking the sidewalk. He reaches over and opens the passenger door. Get in the car. That's when we start running. The guy starts chasing us in his car and one of my friends yells, "Split up and meet back at the house." So at the next corner, we all headed in different directions. Terrified, I kept running straight. A couple of blocks later, I looked back and I'm alone. So I slow down to a walk and I get my bearing. There was nobody around, but just then I see headlights coming from a side street. I dive into a driveway and I hide underneath their car, just as the lights pan over the sidewalk where I was just standing. And yep, it was the same guy. He slowly drives down the street, turns and heads away. And I'm pretty freaking freaked out at this point, but I'm only a couple of blocks from the house, and I think I can make it back. I waited a couple of minutes and I tried to calm down. That's when I started to crawl out from under the car. But then I heard a sound. I froze. It was the same car driving very slowly back from the way he came. But this time, his headlights were off. He goes past the driveway where I'm still hiding and stops at the next house. And he just waits there. Lights off, engine running for what felt like hours. Meanwhile, I'm petrified, laying under a car and breathing into my elbow because I felt for sure that he could hear me panting. Eventually, he turned his lights back on and drove away. I sprinted back to the house and I made it there just as my friends were getting ready to come and look for me. They had all made it back without seeing the car again and were really freaked out when I didn't show up for over half an hour. None of us could sleep that night. That is the end of the story, and we still sometimes talk about it when we see each other, and it still remains to be the scariest night of my life. This next one. I grew up in a well-off neighborhood with a tight-knit community and somewhat overbearing local police force. I was at a local park with family and friends one afternoon, and I was probably about 10 years old. Some kids set off one of those model rockets, and it blasted high into the air and ended up landing behind a house next to the park. Now, being a kid, I run after the rocket and I leave the boundaries of the park. That's when I notice an old beat-up Dodge van, and it was in the parking lot. Then some shady as heck dude rolls down the window and tries to convince me to get into his van because apparently he saw where it landed and that he'd be able to take me to find it. I ran away and I told my dad, and that's when he and a couple of his friends stormed over to see what the heck this shady guy was doing. That's when the dude peeled out and we all looked at it as a really close call. But later that night, a police officer came to the house. Apparently, someone had reported him. The police ran the plates they got from the city camera at the park. It turned out that the guy lived in a small town a couple of hours away from mine. And he was a registered
offender.
The cops told me that I did the right thing by running away. And if I had gotten into the van, I'm sure he would have driven away with me and God knows what would have happened. This next story is actually the reason that I now lock my car doors as soon as I get into my car. It goes like this. I was never personally kidnapped. However, my sister had a very close encounter and I think it's appropriate to share. One Sunday, she was coming out of the grocery store after parking her car in the front rows. As you can imagine, the grocery store was pretty packed out, it being a Sunday and all. Now, during this time, my sister's driver's side door of her car didn't open from the outside. So after putting her groceries in the truck, she proceeded to climb into her car from the passenger side. A man saw her do this, and he took the opportunity to slide into the passenger seat beside her and close the door. Once he shut the door, he pulled out a knife. He told her to drive the car. The man didn't realize, thankfully, that her door opened from the inside. She opened the door and made a run for it. And when she told me this story, she told me, and I quote, "It was either I run and get help or drive and probably die. So I took my chance." After running and screaming for help, the man jumped out of the car. And another man, who I'll always be thankful for, tackles him down, and later the man was charged with attempted kidnapping. So I guess the message that I can pass along from this story is even during the day, at a crowded grocery store on a Sunday, women by themselves, or anyone for that matter, has to have their guard up. You guys, after hearing this story, I have started locking my car. Like locking my car up even when I'm in it. This next one scares me because I used to run away from a foster home that I lived in all the time. And I would meet up with my friend and we didn't really have a lot of street smarts. So this one really scares me. The last time I snuck out of the house was when I was 14. It was 2 a.m. and I was hungry, so I quietly snuck out and walked to the 24/7 supermarket that was right across from the highway. Crossing the street into the parking lot, I noticed an older buff dude standing outside of his car and having a cigarette. His car was the only one in the lot and directly in my path, and as I'm walking towards him and the supermarket, he goes to the back and opens the trunk of his sedan. He was fidgeting in his trunk, and he looks at me and we lock eyes briefly. This guy had an insane look on his face. This intense feeling of dread took over and I instinctively crossed the street away from his car. And I didn't notice until later on that if I kept walking straight, I would have walked straight past him and his open trunk. Outside of the supermarket, there was a Hardee's closing down for the night. So I sit at the tables outside, feeling pretty safe that I was in a public area. The white sedan pulls up in front of the Hardee's and the buff man's friend, who I didn't even know existed, gets out of the car and walks into the restaurant. I saw him walk into the bathroom, so I got up and I hurriedly walked away. That's when I heard the sedan honking and I saw the friend instantly come out of the bathroom. That was enough red flags for me, so I started running. I ran as fast as I could away from the parking lot in the general direction of the highway. After I crossed the highway, I was outside of our apartment complex. That's when I noticed that the sedan was speeding down on the other side of the road, and I saw the driver looking back at me. Safe to say, I never snuck out again after that moment, and I learned a valuable lesson. Don't ignore your gut instinct. Now, the next story that I'm going to tell you is something that is kind of similar to the grocery store one, except people kind of knew what was going on. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to my wife. She was 16 years old and she was working as a courtesy clerk for our grocery store. Basically, her job was to bag up and carry groceries for the older or disabled people. One day, a man who was probably around 35 years old comes in and buys 1 gallon of milk. This man demands that she help him carry the milk to his van. Now, her boss was a jerk and told her that she had to help him because she's not getting paid to do nothing, even with the other workers protesting that the man didn't need help carrying this 1 gallon of milk. So she had to help him. And when she got out to his van with the other employees watching, he said that she needed to get in and put the milk in the back. That's when she said no. She handed him the milk and tried to run away, but he grabbed her by the arm. She was able to yank her arm free and run, and he yelled back at her, got in the van, and sped away. Now, these have all been extremely close encounters. I personally have never had to deal with anything like that, and I don't know what I would do if I did, But oh my goodness, like I cannot even, like I honestly, since I read that story, as I've said like 20 billion times, I lock my car from the inside now. I'm so scared of getting snatched. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for watching. And if you like me reading out these stories to you, make sure you give it a thumbs up. It lets me know that you like this kind of content. And on that note, as you know, I tell other people's story time. So if you've got an experience that you want me to mention in a video, send me an email. Don't leave out any details, because that's what makes these stories unique and interesting. Send your email to submitstorytime@gmail.com. If you've got any screenshots or any evidence, make sure that you're crossing out people's names and photos, because all of my story times will remain anonymous. I would love to have you on my team, so if you like my vibe, click subscribe. I do a true crime Sunday every single Sunday. I tell story times weekly, and I tell these scary story times as well. If you like my vibe, click subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.